Hi, I'm Judith. I'm a Canadian, and I'm over 80 years old. And today I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story in several different ways, actually. So I've been doing these videos for a while now, and I think it was episode 10. I talked about the stories we tell ourselves and how important it is to understand ourselves and our history, to choose the stories we tell ourselves, to choose from the facts of any story how we interpret it, to interpret it in the way that serves us best, that helps us to be happiest about it, perhaps, without lying to ourselves. We're not going to make up lies about things. So just before we start, Jam Today, Judith's Point of View, my channel, to tell you the stories about my life, the things that I've learned, in the hope that it will help you to create your own happy and successful and fulfilling life. I did. I had a lot of blessings and a lot of good luck and good factors working for me, but I did work hard for various reasons, especially having ADHD. But I've worked hard over the years at creating a happy and successful and fulfilling life. And I did it, and it was successful, at least as I define success. And I think that some of the things that I've learned can be of use to other people. I hope especially young people, but maybe to other people at other stages. I don't have a preconceived notion of who this will hit with. So today I'm going to tell you this story, and I'm going to tell it in several ways, but it's a story of how Dan and I came to spend 2 years in France in our midlife. So the very bare facts are, in August of 1993, we packed our things. We moved to the south of France, where we stayed for almost 2 years, till May of 1995. And we didn't work in that during that time. So we had a 2-year midlife sabbatical. And those are the bare bones of the story. So the way that I usually tell this story to people who ask, I don't just say that. Usually I tell the story as a piece of incredible good luck, or as a miracle from God. So I'll tell you a piece of incredible good luck story first. So in April of 1993, I was teaching a course in project management. I was self-employed. If you don't know my background, I was self-employed. I had my own company. A friend had asked me to take over her public course in project management. And she and I had both taught project management for a different company. And basically her course that she had developed was pretty much the same as the one from the other company. I knew the material. And a public course is usually used by gathering people from a lot of different companies, and then she would be trying to sell that to them to buy for more of their staff. But it turned out that she had a conflict. She had a client that had to do that, do some things right then, and she just couldn't do that 3-day course. She asked me to sub for her, so I did. So unlike most corporate courses, which were held in corporate premises, this was held at a hotel, and there was lunch, and there were a few more perks to it, and there were people from all different companies. So there I was doing a 3-day course. Gives you a little bit of background, just purely by accident. At lunch on the second day, happened to be sitting there with people from the course, and one of the people happened to say that she had just come to Toronto a few months before, I think in November. Oh, I said, where are you from? She said, Washington, D.C., but I lived in France for many years. Well, France, I said. Wouldn't that be amazing to live in France? And she said, well, I need a house here and I have a house there. Why don't we swap? Right out of the blue, just like that. She said that. And I said, you don't even know my house. And she said, if it came out of my mouth, it must be okay. Which I think shows tremendous faith in the universe. But anyway, and shows that she's a remarkable woman, and indeed she is. Anyway, I went home that night. I said to my husband, we went out for dinner as it happened, but because I was always tired after teaching, I said to him, how would you like to go live, and it was in the south of France for a year. She wanted the house for a year, 15 months, something. And he said, what? He said, is the Pope Catholic? Of course I'd love to live in the house south of France for a year. How could we do that? that would be impossible. And I said, well, this is what happened today. And I told him. And he said, oh my God, well, I don't know. And I said, well, we can at least talk to her about it. I mean, we're both freelancing. Neither of us had an actual job at that point. We were both freelancing. He was trying to get a business going in the ad business. He was kind of starting out in that. He'd been doing it about a year. And he had some clients and things. And I was, I had my own company since 1988, so for a few years, and I've been mostly subcontracting, but doing a few other things. So I said, we don't have jobs to quit, and and your daughter is just 1 year short of finishing university, and I think we could do it, and so he said, well, we'll agree. Let's talk to her, okay. So back in the next day, and I knew that she was serious because she said, what did Monsieur say? And I said, well, he said, let's talk. Really, I had said, let's talk, but oh well. And so we set up a date for about 2 weeks from then. We looked at our calendars 2 weeks from then. And that time, Dan was just like, well, what if she doesn't like the food? We're going to serve Indian food. What if she doesn't like Indian food? What if she doesn't like the house? What if, And we did talk to our financial advisor about the idea of swapping our house for a house in the south of France for a couple of years and not working, or a year, 15 months and not working. And she said, well, if you can work it out so that it doesn't really cost you more, it'll be a blip in your horizon. Actually, it'll be a little blip in your finances, but it'll be an amazing opportunity. You ought to do it. So, and we had some savings and some investments at that point. But we still had a mortgage. We weren't like rich or anything. So she came for dinner, and we opened the door to the house, and she said, I could live here. And we knew that we were going to France, and we did not know where. We had no idea where. And we talked about it by the end of the evening. We had figured out everything else. And that was May the 5th or 6th or something like that. And 3 months to that day, we arrived in France. Maybe it was May the 4th. I think we arrived in France on August the 4th of 1993. And as it turned out, we ended up being there for 2 years. We extended our time there. We were there for almost 2 years. And it was the most fabulous adventure. So as I tell that story, that was like just a bolt out of the blue. That happened, and this opportunity, this like winning the lottery, just something. Well, I mean, we didn't even buy the tickets, something just happened. So it was this amazing thing that happened to us right out of the blue, and we did it, and wow, wasn't that incredible? And all of that's true. But there's another story. The other story on that is a backstory to that, which is that this whole thing was an enormous gift from God or from the universe or something, or from our subconscious. This was an enormous gift of something that we had been hoping and praying for, although not in that form. Let me see, how can I? Yeah, so about, let's see, in 1980, I've mentioned this in other videos, in 1982, I started getting symptoms of loss of balance, dizziness, not quite dizziness, I don't know, like vertigo, something. And I would have them every day, and I had them for about 18 months, and then I didn't have any symptoms for a while. Then another time I lost my balance for 2 or 3 months, and another time, there were just symptoms. I started going deaf in one ear. I would have balance issues from time to time, and then they would go away. And finally, and I had x-rays, and I had tests and whatever, and I had a CAT scan. It showed nothing. It said, no, I don't think so. There might be something, but we don't think so. There weren't MRIs in those days. And then there was finally an MRI and then there was a whole mix-up where I was on a list for MRIs, and then I got dropped from the list because it wasn't at my hospital, and my hospital got an MRI. I don't know. I had a lack of 2 years. When I tried to follow up, I found out that I wasn't on any list for the MRI. And I had been waiting for a couple or 3 years to have this MRI. Finally, I got an MRI, and it showed that I had an acoustic neuroma. That was in the fall of November, I think, or so, October of 1991. And it showed that I had a tumor. And so anyway, time went on. In 1992, in the fall of 1992, the tumor was still growing. And I wanted to go to Stockholm, Sweden for gamma knife radiology. I'd had time to research, and I wanted to go and have that treatment rather than the surgery that was being suggested here, or the alternative radiation that was available here, which wasn't being used for that purpose particularly. But gamma knife was been invented in Sweden, and it was being used in all the European countries. It was in Japan, it was in Korea, South Korea. It was going into the U.S., pretty new there. They were not the first adopters, but it was being used regularly for acoustic neuroma. It was the treatment of choice. And so I did manage, and I told that story in another video, at least mentioned it at least once, on decision making, one that came out recently. But I had a fight with OHIP. They wouldn't pay for it. We had to appeal. We had to borrow money from our mortgage and so on. But anyway, it was a long fight to get a doctor who would agree to it, try to get OHIP approval, to figure out how we could do it without OHIP approval and get the money. And then all the time you've got this tumor growing that could kill you, but it wasn't going to kill me fast. But it could cause damage as it got larger. And luckily they're slow growing and always benign. So I wasn't dealing with cancer, and it was slow growing, but it was growing. And so I had that radiation in November of 1992, and I was tired. I was really tired. It was only 10 minutes of radiation one day. It wasn't the radiation that made me tired. It was the fight, the long fight, the long worry about the decision making and trying to get that decision implemented. I was really tired. I was working a contract at Imperial Oil. It was one of the 2 contracts I ever worked outside, long-term contracts I ever worked outside of the house in my 20 years of having my own business. But it was, I was just exhausted, and 10 years of debilitating symptoms at times. I was tired, and I needed a rest. And so this offer to swap our house for a house in the south of France was a huge gift from God. And it was something that, we took the offer, obviously, and we did it, and I'll never regret it. And so I can tell the story that way too. So that's the longer version of the story, that somehow God saw the need and put that person in our place, or the universe, I don't care who you think did it, something did it, my subconscious did it, whatever. And so I believe that it wasn't an accident that we had this opportunity. And sometimes I tell the story that way, but I can tell the story another way. So another thing that had been going on, meanwhile, in our lives, I guess while I was having the symptoms of the tumor, but for several years, not connected with the tumor things at all. I had been working a corporate job until 1988, and I had wanted time out, and then I did, manage to get out of a corporate job and work from home, and that was all great. But we were also talking about some kind of a sabbatical, a midlife sabbatical. I wanted to write. I didn't quite know what. I had tried my hand at romance, and that wasn't really working. Fiction wasn't really my thing. I was writing some nonfiction. I thought maybe Dan and I could do something where he was a very good photographer. He was a musician, a photographer, in addition to his day job in advertising, in the commercial art side of advertising. And I thought that we could maybe, I don't know, go on an adventure of some kind. I've always liked timeouts, So one time I went to a spa for 3 weeks. I like to have a timeout and just do some other things. So the one I had thought of was that we could take a year off. We were thinking we would take a year off, um, and we would buy a recreational vehicle and tow a car, and we would put the ocean on our left, and we would just drive down along the ocean from the States and up and around, and then come back through Canada, and we would take about a year to do that. And our idea then, when we first got this idea, it was about 1989. We bought our house in 1981. This is about 1989. And we were thinking, or 1988, 89, in those years. I had gone freelance in 1988. So we were talking about ways that Dan could be freed up from his job too, and maybe we could, while we were gone, he could do photographs and I could write about. We could do something like all the public golf courses in the U.S. that were on our route, like a picture book with little write-ups of like a guidebook of public golf courses. So not the really private, expensive ones, but public ones that anyone could go to. Although Pebble Beach in California is pretty expensive for one that you can go to. So we thought we would do that, and we had investigated doing that, and we had dreamed about it, and we had set goals to do it, and we were envisioning it. We were doing visioning about it. We had actually, for the summer of 1993, we had booked already. We had booked earlier in 1993 or late in 1992, we had booked the rental of an RV. We were going to rent an RV as a practice thing and move down and go for a month or something, take it down, I don't know, to the Maritimes and see how we liked, driving an RV and how it was and so on. We had also, our original plan back in the mid-'80s when we thought of this, and house prices were kind of high, getting pretty good around 1988 or 89. Our house was worth quite a bit more than we had paid for it. And interest rates were pretty decent. They were about 10%. And we thought, that we could sell our house, and house prices were fairly stable. They weren't rising fast or falling fast. Things were pretty stable. We thought we could sell our house, bank that money, use the money, invest the money, and get a 10% return. We thought we could get a 10% return in the stock market, and or in interest-bearing certificates or things. And we could go away for a year, and we could come back and buy another house, and we would have enough money to still buy another house. Well, by 1992 or 93, that was not a good idea. Interest rates had fallen, house prices had risen, I think. Selling our house would likely mean we wouldn't be able to afford to buy it again. We wouldn't be able to get enough money to live on. We'd have to use some of that money to live on. We didn't know how that was going to happen, but we kept dreaming because I believe in visualization, as you might know from an earlier video I did. Visualization and affirmations, and we kept dreaming about this time out, this time that we would have to be together and to do something creative and not to work for a period of a year or so. And then along came this woman who offered us her house in the south of France, and that turned out to be even better. And so I can tell this story as a miracle of God that came out because I needed the rest, but it also was a story of us visualizing some kind of outcome in which we would be free to go away. And it turned out we didn't have to sell our house because she wanted to swap our house for a house she owned in the south of France that she wasn't living in. She was renting it out or giving it to people to keep, and she would come occasionally. So there's another way to tell the story. And that in that form, it fits into another video I just did earlier today, which was likely will have been out a week by the time you see this one. And that video was about decision making and about how something that might look like a rash decision might not be so rash, because it wasn't that we were just so brave that and 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 that this came out total out of the blue and we had never thought of ever going anywhere and whatever, and we just 3 months later we were there. It didn't happen that way. We had been preparing in a sense for a lot of years, for several years. We had been preparing by visualizing, by thinking about this time out, by thinking about what we could do, by thinking about how we would like this time out. So that, plus being tired from the medical thing and needing time out to rest and recover from that, all made it easier to see the possibilities and the big advantages of doing this plan that the universe suddenly, or God suddenly presented to us. And and so what looked from the outside to be like a decision that we got it, and within 2 weeks we had decided we were moving, you know, to the south of France and putting all our money up and whatever, to putting all our money at risk and giving up our work, not jobs, but our work, our clients, everything for what seemed pretty insecure. It wasn't as rash as that because we had been preparing in many ways. We had been saving and we had been investing and we had been thinking about this, and we were mentally and emotionally prepared and ready and willing and hoping for something like this. It just turned out to be better than we ever expected. So the story is true in every aspect. It was this incredible out of the blue piece of luck. It was a miracle delivered from God. It was, um, I believe, the result of our need and my need and our visualization and our intentions and our subconscious working, helping to work with the universe for that happening. And it was a decision that we could make very easily and very quickly because we were really ready for it. And that does not appear in the surface, you know? But I can tell you another story and another way about it. Okay, so another thing is we actually stayed, we extended our stay um, for an extra, after the 15 months was up, an extra 6 or 8 months beyond that. We were able to do that because OHIP came through with the money that it had cost for the radiation treatment, the $20,000. And we said that money we had taken out of the mortgage that I talked about in one of the previous videos, instead of putting it back into the mortgage, no. We just stayed in France for extra time. Was that a foolish decision? I don't know. I don't think so. We weren't ready to come back, and there was another opportunity that we had. We certainly went on faith that we were going to be able to come back and recoup, and we did. But I can tell you that that was not the easiest part of things. First of all, when we came back, I cried all the way home. I cried when we had to leave France because we had run out of money. We had spent all our savings. We had spent almost all of our RSPs, and our mortgage was bigger than it had. Well, by the time we got back, we had to go and borrow some more money from the mortgage in order to give us, I don't know, 3 months of money or something to live on until we could find work and the money would start coming in. And we ended up with a mortgage that was bigger than the mortgage we had started with in 1981 when we first bought the house, 1982 when we first bought the house. Now the house was worth a lot more, so our mortgage was not as big proportionally, but it was certainly, in absolute dollar terms, it was big. And at the same time, my husband decided that he didn't really want to go back into the ad business. Actually, he had told me that from the time we left. He wasn't going back into the ad business for reasons that were his and quite legitimate, that as you got older, it was a young man's business. And as you got older, there was a time in your 40s and 50s when you could be a mentor to the younger people. But by the time you hit your late 50s or your 60s, you started being treated, in his words, like an old fart who didn't know anything. And you were treated almost with contempt by the younger people who thought that you were really just, way out of touch and you didn't really understand anything. And Dan loved that time when he was a mentor and when he really mattered to the people, the younger people. And I think he worked for that kind of satisfaction. and praise more than for the money. The sense of that what he was doing was appreciated, by his bosses and by those that he was helping in the staff, and he wasn't going to go back and be treated like someone who was just past it. And as it turned out, he never went back to work at a job, or I mean, tried to earn some money doing some things with photography and music, and didn't really. So he ended up being a house husband for 13 years, and none of us foresaw that. Neither of us foresaw that, and that caused some strains, as you might imagine. It caused some difficulties, which we overcame. We dealt with and overcame, and everything turned out fine in the end. But we had several years. I did get work really fast, like within 2 weeks of getting home. As it happened, I was very fortunate. I had work right away, and as I mentioned before, I had really good skills, and in those days, those skills paid really, really well, much better than they pay now, and so I was able to resume my work as a corporate trainer and as an instructional designer, working from home in my house quite a lot of the time, and but I never saw The Lion King because we couldn't afford it. I never saw, I don't know. There were some other really popular shows and things and stage plays at that time that I never saw because we couldn't afford it. Um, we were just knuckling down to replenish our savings, to repay the mortgage, we weren't starving or anything, but uh, we were not flush with money, let's put it that way, and we had to do a lot of work. I had to do a lot of work, but Dan had to as well. He took care of a lot of things for me. I didn't cook a meal or change the kitty litter or do laundry for 13 years. Um, so that's another way of looking at it, and I could tell the story that way, as though we did this and it cost us a lot. And I suppose if I wanted to go on the negatives, I could dwell on that part, but I don't, because the truth is it turned out okay. And the other truth is that, we ended, I mean, if we had stayed, we would have been richer in money because we would have both continued to work. He did have clients and so on in the ad business, and he wouldn't have quit as early as that. He would have worked another 5 or 8 years or something until he got to the point where they considered him the old fart. Um, and um, and and I would have gone on making that money, and we wouldn't have spent all the money that we had already accumulated. So we would have been much richer, but we would not have been richer in terms of life experience, in terms of joy, in terms of bliss, in terms of the richness of the life that we had there for 2 years, the friends we made, the lifelong friends we made, who are still friends of mine today. The I still have incredible memories. The other thing that was hard about coming home was, they say when you go on vacation that for every week you're on vacation, you're going to have a week of depression when you get back. Well, I had 2 years at least of depression when we came back. Not clinically depressed, but just every day being homesick to want to go back to France, just longing for it, seeing visualizations in my mind all the time. And we carried that dream for a long time of going back to live in France. And I told the story recently in, I think it's like 2 videos ago, about how we were thinking about wintering in France in our retirement, but unfortunately Dan was cut down suddenly with a heart attack and died. Um, so I guess the story, well, it's a really important part of my life, and there are a lot of lessons to be learned, but I think the main things are, number one, if you make a decision, you can make a decision pretty fast sometimes if you're really, really ready for it. So in terms of the decision-making episodes, there was one that might have looked rash to the outside, but was not. We were so ready for it. It was mostly an emotional decision, but we did do the left brain thing of talking to our financial advisor and looking at the odds and saying, well, we'd still have a house and so on. And we had faith that that this wasn't a scam, that the person who offered it to us was not going to wreck our house and so on. It all turned out in the end. I think they ended up leaving us some mismatched towels and taking away a cheap waste paper basket that they forgot wasn't theirs. It was no big deal. We took a carving board from their place because Dan loved it, and I still have it to this day, a little tiny old cheese board. I fessed up afterwards that we stole it. Um, and we laughed about it I'm still friends with the woman who was the angel in that case that offered us her house. Um, so I could tell the story in many ways, and so I talked about the decision making, but I could also talk about it as a miracle and so on. And depending on who I'm talking to, I'll talk about it as a miracle from God, or as a something I really needed from the point of view of whatever. I usually don't talk about it in terms of how ready we were to make that decision. Sometimes I will tell a bit fuller story. Um, I do sometimes tell the story of how hard it was afterwards. But that isn't the main part of it. The main part was how it came about, how this miracle, this absolute gift that we would never have considered, never have thought of, never have dreamed of, came into our lives, and how we took it. And I will never, ever, ever regret that decision or a decision to stay longer. So I hope you have miracles in your life. I hope you have things that just come because you've been dreaming of them or wanting them or praying for them, maybe in the form that you don't recognize. Which is why I often end my prayers by saying, when I ask for something, I say, this or something better for the highest good of all concerned. This or something better for the highest good of all concerned. Anyway, take what you like and leave the rest as always. And, if you're young, you have many, many things that may happen that are just miracles in your life. And if you're older, maybe you can look back and see in some of the things that have happened to you that they were miracles that came along at the right time for you as well. Anyway, take care till the next one.